This is part 2 of chapter 79. The older ways still remain the substratum of all modern life. Quote, "The past," Tyler wrote, "is continually needed to explain the present, and the whole to explain the part. There seems to be no human thought so primitive as to have lost its bearing on our own thought, nor so ancient as to have broken its connection with our own life." End of quote. Following the clues of Lyell's new geology, Tyler brought the uniformitarian idea into social science, which made the living present an uninterrupted avenue into the living past. To test his doctrine of survival, Tyler rashly entered the most controversial, most passion-ridden arena he could find: religion. Animism, Animism was his own word for the minimal form of religion. This he defined as a belief in spiritual beings. There appeared to be no tribes of men, Tyler observed, that, quote, "have no religious conceptions whatever," end of quote. Savages saw these spiritual beings in plants, animals, and features of the landscape. And from such elemental notions, all religions evolved through a belief in a future state to later identification with moral elements and on toward monotheism. To this notion, Tyler devoted more than half his work on primitive culture, and so incorporated the most sensitive, most sacred notions of his age into his science of culture. Could the seeds of Victorian civilization be germinating at that very moment in all the savage tribes of the world? Animism was his strongest antidote to British provincialism and complacency, and a clue to countless other paths from Victorian England back to despised savage tribes. While Darwin had dared a flank attack on Christian orthodoxy, Tyler's attack was frontal. His developmental approach to humankind was a menacing and perhaps fatal blow to the dogmas of Eden, to the sudden revelations of Christian gospel and a savior. Was it possible that the great truths of monotheism in Christianity had developed gradually out of the whole worldwide human experience? Tyler's shocking science of culture breathed renewed vigor into the embattled champions of the Christian dogma of human degeneration. Richard Whately, 1787 to 1863, Anglican Archbishop of Dublin, reformer, and apostle of the Irish poor, established himself as a witty defender of the faith by his first book, Historic Doubts Relative to Napoleon Bonaparte, 1819. He ridiculed David Hume's application of strict logic to biblical miracles by showing how the same reasoning would raise doubts about the existence of Napoleon. In his popular pamphlet, On the Origin of Civilization, in 1855, Whately next targeted Adam Smith and other partisans of progress. Having described with disgust the polygamous, cannibalistic savage encountered by missionaries, he asked, could this abandoned creature entertain any of the elements of nobility? If savage people showed cleverness in the arts, this must be a relic of an advanced civilization from which they have degenerated. Could anyone produce a single example of a primitive people rising to a civilized state, except when aided from the outside by peoples who had not degenerated? Whately's degeneration theory was the most popular enemy of Tyler's comparative method, and so too of a science of culture. Tyler's progression theory boldly traced all human history as, quote, the development of culture, end of quote, and asked, quote, whether we find one recorded instance of a civilized people falling independently into a savage state, end of quote. Only a science of culture would save man from the pitfalls of piety and tradition. Quote, in discussing problems as complex as those of the development of civilization, it is not enough to put forward theories accompanied by a few illustrative examples. The statement of the facts must form the staple of the argument, and the limit of needful detail is only reached when each group so displays its general law that fresh cases come to range themselves in their proper niches as new instances of an already established rule, end of quote. Tyler welcomed questions which he could not begin to answer, but which others had not even begun to ask. To Tyler himself, dominated by the late Victorian idea of development, that is, that all societies had followed a single course of evolution, some more slowly than others, A unilinear view of human progress was especially tempting. It cast a roseate glow over the future of all peoples and incidentally made all living primitive cultures a rich and accessible source for history. Just as Schliemann had some very personal reasons to believe that he had found the true Troy and the relics of Agamemnon's feast, so Tyler and his co-evolutionists were eager to see living savages reenact the infancy, quote unquote, of their civilization. Still, Tyler believed himself not the prophet of a dogma, but the discoverer of a science. He was happy in the thought that he was opening questions beyond his power to answer. The last 25 years of his long life, he devoted to organizing and promoting his science of culture under the name of anthropology. The Royal Anthropological Institute, with his guidance, became a lively parliament of anthropological science. In successive editions of Notes and Queries on Anthropology for, quote, the use of travelers and residents in uncivilized lands, end of quote, Tyler himself collected countless facts and encouraged others to do the same toward a growing science. When he sensed that unilinear evolution could not explain the varieties of culture, he asked how cultural features might be diffused from people to people. Hoping to illuminate these questions, Tyler persuaded the British Association for the Advancement of Science in 1888 to undertake a long-range study of the little-known tribes of the northwest coast of Canada. That 12-year field study by Franz Boas, 1858 to 1942, was supervised by Tyler himself and prepared Boas to become the great reviser of Tyler's science. As Tyler wrote to Boas in 1895, the time had come for a reformation in anthropology. A frail and precocious child in Westphalia, Boas very early absorbed the liberalism of his free-thinking Jewish parents, who had remained loyal to the spirit of the Revolution in 1848. As a young man, he studied the natural sciences in several German universities. Then he spent a year exploring Baffin Island and living with the Indians in the Canadian Northwest, which awakened his interest in a science of culture. At the age of 28, he immigrated to the United States, where he began a whirlwind career in universities, museums, and learned societies, which established him, before he was 50, as the dominant spirit in this new profession in the United States. He helped found the American Anthropological Association, wrote a classic Mind of Primitive Man in 1911, lectured brilliantly, enlisted a devoted following of students, and as a citizen spokesman pioneered in applying his anti-racist doctrine to American immigration policy. Boas fulfilled Tyler's hope even more grandly than Tyler could have imagined, for he did more than anyone else to liberate the science of culture from the provincial prejudices of Tyler's Britain. In its first phase, quote, Mr. Tyler's science, end of quote, had already done wonders to widen the vision of human society. The doctrine of evolution itself whetted appetites for facts about all the peoples of the earth. The unilinear track of progress seemed to destine all primitive people to the happy climax of Victorian Britain. But Boas could not believe that there was only one cultural destination for the whole human race. If, quote, all mankind is one, end of quote, if, as Tyler had insisted, all mankind had an equal capacity to develop cultural forms, then there must have been many different tracks and destinations for human progress, as many as the circumstances of geography, climate, language, and historical accidents. Even more than Tyler himself, Boas saw culture triumphant. The cultural history of each people was unique. All surviving groups of people, Boas argued, had developed equally, but there were as many different ways as there were groups. Also a believer in the primacy of facts, Boas was even more incrementalist than his mentor. Perhaps human nature was too complex, human cultures too diverse for any simple general solution, even one as grand as evolution. Perhaps the science of culture would have to grow, not wholesale and speedily, with large organizing ideas like animism, but retail, slowly, and piecemeal, by tracing the relations among the elements in one culture and then seeing similar relations reappear in others. While Tyler had opened the vistas to the world of cultures, Boas now opened vistas to the wonderful subtlety within every culture, and to connections between every culture and all its surroundings, its geography, nutrition, diseases, and accidental encounters. Tyler, as first professor of anthropology at Oxford, believed that he had helped liberate his disciples from an unholy alliance between theology, classical studies, and the old-style natural sciences. Theology teaching only the true God, objected to talk of false gods. Classical studies knew only the cultures of Greece and Rome. The natural sciences feared, with some reason, that the new social sciences would empty their lecture rooms. Clued by his happy accidental encounter with the New World, Tyler had charted a science that reached beyond English academic orthodoxies. Quote, Mr. Boas's science, end of quote, made the culture of every people another new world. And this concludes chapter 79.